Thanks a lot, Tom. I appreciate the confidence there, buddy. Usually I say it's either going to be a bowl or it's going to be a bunch of chips on the ground. And it's, a toss up which way it's going to go. This demonstration is going to have very little turning in reality. It's mostly about you lost me, I think. Am I there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me in the cheap seats? All right. It's mostly going to be about the stone inlay and the process of doing that. So I'm going to start out with a little bit of turning, and I've got to do this first because I need to get this thing round again. I've already got it. I don't think you guys need to watch me turn a bowl, but I'm just going to true this up a little bit, and then I'm going to cut the groove in it or the stone. Part of the process of doing that, I think I need a little more speed here. I have the need for speed. The process of doing it is you have to put sanding sealer on the wood because you use a lot of CA glue. And if you worked with CA glue, you know that it's going to stain the wood. So I use a sanding sealer that I make. It's shellac and denatured alcohol. It's about 3-to-1, and that's it's not exacting at all. I just get it kind of close to that. The good thing is with it is, for the purpose of this demo anyway, is it dries really fast. So I'll put the sanding sealer on here in a couple minutes. I'll go over and we'll talk about the stone and how to crush it and where to get it and different things. And by the time I'm done with that, it'll be dry enough that I'll be able to use this piece to do the inlay. Okay, so on the examples back there, you saw there's different ways to do this. You can do the inlay right on the edge so that the stone is exposed on the top surface and the outside of the bowl. You can do it so the stone is only exposed on the top, or you can do it with the stone exposed on the inside, the outside, and the top. We're going to go for this one with it on the top and the outside. Okay. Now, the way we do that is we cut a groove in here and you leave wood on the outside. Put the stone in, and then we turn away the wood that's on the outside. So I'm going to cut a groove in here, and I don't want much wood on the outside. Just want a little bit there. And what I usually do is kind of a rule of thumb is however wide I make this groove, I want to make it that depth too. So basically it's going to be a square piece of stone in there. So if I've got a 3/8 of an inch of stone showing on the top, I want that much on the side too, more or less. Don't necessarily measure it, just kind of get something close. And good wide parting tool seems to be the best thing to do this with. And that's about the end of my turning demo. Wasn't that exciting? And actually, I've got a little bit of a ragged edge here that I need to clean up. So, oh, I lost some of the edge. Okay, well, we're back to the drawing board. Let's see, how am I going to do this? This bowl just got smaller. Let's see. Well, it's going to get even smaller. The thing that you need to be cautious about when you're doing it this way is when you get close to that outside edge, the wood chips away on you, and you no longer have a place so you can put the stone in without it all leaking out the side when you're putting the glue in. So we'll try this again, and I'll leave a little more room there. I hope. Anybody got a guess on what kind of wood this is? Nope. Anybody else? No guesses? We have anybody in the wood savers club or whatever they call the thing? It's actually hornbeam. Came from Missouri Botanical Gardens. Okay, I'm going to leave it nice and thick there so it's good and safe this time. One time screwing it up was enough. Okay, let me just turn off this top a little bit more. Okay, and I like to do this with the bowl turned just like this when I put the stone in, because that CA glue will get everywhere if you're not careful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to protect the lathe a little bit. And I'm going to put sanding sealer on there, if I can find it. And again, it's shellac denatured alcohol. It does separate like crazy. You ever used this kind of a sanding sealer? And I put it anywhere, especially in the groove, because it will soak into this wood enough that when you turn away the inside to complete the bowl, it'll actually soak right through. No, the other way around. 3 parts shellac, 1 part denatured alcohol. Okay, and it's about half dry already. So we're just going to let that set. Actually, I'll take it off the lathe, because if I can get it off the lathe. Lock. It won't stay locked, will it? Hold it. There we go. Okay, got it. Okay, so now we're going to go back here on the table, which is kind of good because I get to sit down now. We're going to talk about the stone. There's a lot of different kinds of stone you can use for this. Are we going to be able to bring the camera back here? Or? Okay. All right. Well, we're good for now. I have some handouts for you if anybody that's interested that talks about the Mohs hardness scale. And that is the scale that's universally used to determine how hard a rock is, different kinds of stone. Example, talc is 1. It's very, very soft. A diamond is 10. That's the top end of the scale. The thing you got to remember is if you go from 2 to 3, 3 is twice as hard as 2. So that's how the scale progresses, more or less. So 4 to 5, 5 is twice as hard as 4. So things get pretty hard. A nail, just a standard nail that you might use, is 6.5 hardness. So when we go to crush the stone, we're crushing it. I crush it with a piece of pipe, basically, that I'll show you in a second. So if you get anything harder than a nail, harder than a 6.5 hardness, you're not going to crush it with a piece of metal unless you've got something pretty serious. The crusher that I use is pretty simple. 2-inch piece of pipe with a 2-inch pipe cap, a 1-inch piece of pipe with a 1-inch pipe cap inserted in there. Oh, okay. There, we're good. And then you beat on it with a hammer. Okay. To demonstrate it, I'm going to do one of the softest stones. If I can see what I did with it. Here, slate. Slate, which is 2.5 on the hardness scale. Okay. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a quick demonstration on how this thing works. Dump some stone in there. Put the crusher in. I usually wrap a towel around it because things tend to spray around a little bit. And with slate, you can literally just crush it like this. Now, most of the stones that you're going to want to use aren't going to be this easy. Like the stones that are over there, the coral is pretty soft, or the coral's pretty soft. The howlite's harder. You know, you start talking about trying to do it out of something like jade or quartz, it's going to be very difficult to do. Quartz is like 8, I think, on the hardness scale. So if it's harder than the steel, you're not going to be able to crush it. Okay, then what I do is I separate it. Okay, we're here now with the camera. Okay. Okay, so at that point, I need to sort the stone. So you end up with different degrees of being ground up. Okay, and I just use a couple of dollar store funnels and make a big mess, and you end up with what is basically dust, and then you end up with different sizes. Typically, I would have 3 different sizes that I would start by using. Okay, and we're going to do this particular bowl. We're going to use the red coral for. And let me grab my newspapers back here. Yeah. Got trapped. Got me trapped. Hey, that sounds about right. Okay, and just to give you an idea, some of the stones that work well for this process are calcite, which is a common stone in Missouri. If you ever go on one of the cave tours and you see the crystal formations in the caves, it's usually calcite. Calcite is fairly soft. It's about 3 on the hardness scale, so you can crush it fairly easily, not by just banging it like that. You're going to have to resort to a hammer. I had a hammer here. This is the method for crushing that. And usually, you know, go down on the floor or on an anvil if you have one is perfect. And then beat on this thing. The harder you get, the harder the stone, the harder you have to beat. So if you're going to try something for your first attempt, I would definitely suggest you go with one of the softer stones. Okay, so we're going to do red coral. I've already got it crushed.
You have it in 3 different sizes.
I have it in 3 different sizes. My terminology is medium, small, and dust. Okay, so the first step is the medium. And I find it much easier to put it in one of these little cups. Can you see this thing on the screen? Because I have no idea what you're looking at. You got it? Okay. All right. So we're going to put the stone in the groove. Can't do both. Well, why don't you just get the bowl? You don't need me. Okay. All right. So we're going to spread the stone around here in the groove. And this is the medium. And it's basically a 3-part process where you're going to put the larger stones in first. You don't want it to be too much proud of the wood. You want to keep it down in there at the wood level, because the more you put in, the more you're going to have to grind away to make it smooth across the top. And when I say grind, I say it's really grind. Most of these stones you cannot cut with a tool. This is 3. This you could cut with a carbide tool. I have done that, but what tends to happen is the carbide is harder than the coral, so it, in theory, will cut it, but it will also chip the carbide. So you need to be a little cautious on that, because you can chip your carbide away. Okay, so now I've got the stone in there, kind of. I like my cheap Harbor Freight screwdriver because it's rubber and you can just tap it and get the stuff to settle down in there a little better. And then take a look and see if there's any place that's got a little bit of a void that I need more. And the newspaper doesn't help the picture any, but the newspaper is because the stone that falls off I can reuse. And the issue with the stone is not the price. The issue with the stone is the agonizing crushing of it sometimes to get it. Oh, good. Yep, never mind. I got another one. Oh, dang it. I glued the lids on. Do you have a pair of pliers? Anybody got a pair of pliers? Ah, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, all right. Now, I tend to use one of these little tips to put this on with, except and we're just going to put CA glue in here, and it takes a fair amount. For the most part, at this point, I just want to glue it down. I don't need to try and fill the whole space up. But if you use these little tips, you can direct it a little better. And you're going to use enough CA glue in this project that you don't really want to use any more than you have to. So I'll spread it around the whole thing. If there's any questions out there, just yell. If there's any questions about what kind of stone you can use, that's usually the question that comes up is, you know, can I use this? Can I use that? This whole process can be done with a lot of different things. And I've got some examples of a couple of things that you can do it with. Okay, so. I've never had that problem, and I've done this, you know, and turned it almost immediately because you're putting it on in layers. So there wasn't really that much glue on there. There's enough to hold it together. And then I'll use the accelerator. This thin, yes. Yeah, it's thin. Okay, so I'm done with what I call the medium size stone. And I'm going to go to the small. So basically, we're going to put the small in. It's going to fill in the gaps around the medium. And repeat.
You wanted me to repeat. Do you use the thin glue or the medium glue?
Thin CA glue. It is thin CA glue, yeah. I do sometimes use some medium, and I may, when we get into this a little farther, when you grind this stuff down, and what's the lowest grit sandpaper you guys normally use when you're doing a turning project? 80 maybe? 80 maybe, right? Well, on this, we're going to start at 36. So it's real coarse sandpaper. And because of the CA glue, it will also tend to clog up that sandpaper fairly readily. Okay. But there's a lot of other things you can use. One of the things I have up here is an example. Anybody ever pick these up on the beach in Florida? Conch shells. Makes good inlay material. You can use sand. If you can use a whole lot of different kinds of stone. Most of the stone that I have came from either Amazon or YouTube. And most of it is relatively inexpensive. There's probably, I'll probably have $1 worth of coral in this thing by the time I'm done, just to give you an idea. Okay, so got that on. And we're gonna go back to the CA now. And this time I'm gonna put a little more CA on. I'm not really flooding it necessarily, but I'm gonna put enough in that it's gonna fill in some of the gaps. And the one thing I didn't do is I didn't tap it down, which I should have. And like I said, that cheapy rubber handled screwdriver works well for that purpose. The other thing is I would suggest is when you start one of these projects, once you put this on a chuck, I would leave it on the chuck until you're done. Don't try and take it off and get it back on, because you can hardly ever get anything back on so that it turns totally true again. And if you're trying to turn away the wood on the outside of this stone, it better be running true or you're going to have a problem. Okay, so accelerator. And I'll just dump off anything that's loose. Okay, and I'm done with the small. And now I need the dust, which is really like a powder. I don't know, I'm holding it someplace where you can see it or not, or here's the slate. You can see that's what I would call the dust. I mean, it's just a powder. So the idea now is we're going to fill in any voids that remain. And you can see, yeah, it's three different things you've got to do. But how long have I been working on this thing? What time is it? 20 minutes, say, since I started putting the stone in, maybe probably not even that long.
Tom, you might mention to them that they have to clean out that pipe between different types of stone.
Have to clean, I couldn't hear you, Tom.
You might have to mention to them they have to clean out that pipe between changing stones.
Yes, yeah, the crusher, you do have to, if you're doing red coral and the next thing you're going to do is howlite, which is white, you better get all that coral out of there first. Air compressor works pretty well for doing that. You can also just, turn this thing upside down and tap it, and you get it out. I don't know if you could see that or not, but all that stuff would have been mixed into the coral if that was what I was doing next. Okay. So you can, when you get to the dust or the powdered stuff, you can use a little brush to get some of that off. You notice that, you don't have to be too neat. I mean, it works. Okay, now we're back to the CA. Now this time, I really do want to flood it. I want to pretty much put on there all that it's gonna take. So it takes a fair amount. You just Amazing, I haven't got any on my hands yet. I've never used CA and not got it on my hands. Whenever I use CA, I keep the accelerator really handy because I have glued my fingers together in the past, but I found that if you get it on your fingers, you spray it, it sets, and then you can't stick them together at least. You still got it on there. And as someone was saying before, the fumes can be a little much. So it's better if you've got some ventilation. You know, in a big room like this, I'm probably the only one that can smell it, but it can be a little overpowering. At home, I usually have a small fan just blowing across. Okay. So now, give it a minute or two, and it doesn't take very long. A little more than that. It gets warm when you hit it with this too. Okay, now there's another way that you can do the stone, and we may get to it or not, I don't know. And I got another piece of wood here. And the examples I have in this one, the stone is all on the top, but you can also put the stone in around the outside of the bowl. The difference is you got to do it in little stages when you put the stone in. So you'll do an inch or an inch and a half, use the accelerator on it, turn it, do another inch or inch and a half. Works best if you're doing it on the lathe. So we'll see. We may get there, we may not. Okay. All right, so now go back on the lathe. And while that's setting just a little bit longer, I'll talk about these handouts that are here. There's, I don't know, if anybody's interested, there's handouts that have the stone hardness. It's got the scale. Am I back on this camera? Yeah, it's got it's got the scale of hardness. Again, 1 is talc, 10 is diamond. The thing to remember is this nail at 6.5. Anything close to that, and you're going to have a really hard time crushing it. It's going to be very difficult to do. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Then, yeah. You can download it on Google too. And then this sheet shows the scale of different stones that are alphabetized. So if you see something, you do a Google search or you do an Amazon search and you think, oh man, that's pretty stone. Let me look at it. What is it? It's oh, it's blue quartz. Well, blue quartz is 7 on the hardness scale. I don't think you're gonna be able to crush that. It's gonna be too hard. But there's a lot of things on here that are not that hard. Calcite, fluorite, coral, anything that's, if you're in the 3 to 5 range, you're going to have pretty good success at crushing it. Slate is even softer than that. It's not very exciting, just black. But you can do other things. Yes. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. You might be able to. It's just going to be a lot more work. That's all. I've done turquoise. Is about the hardest thing that I've crushed, and I can't remember the hardness off the top of my head. And I'll find it on here. It's 5 to 6 in turquoise, and that's about the hardest that I've attempted to crush. Yes. That's right. They have to be natural stones, because if you go on Amazon or eBay and you start looking at stones, you got to make sure that they're natural stones too, that they're not dyed. Like somebody said, well, can we get aquarium rock? Because you can go to a tropical fish store and they've got gravel in every color of the rainbow. The problem is the color is only in the outside of it. It's not all the way through. So when you crush it, you're going to get whatever is underneath that coming through, which I think is some kind of white stone. So you're going to get, you know, something else happening there. So it does have to be natural stone, but there's other things you can use, like the shells. You can use, you know, you can get shells in all different colors, coral. You can actually get powdered metal. You can get copper and brass and nickel, silver, and use that using the same process as doing this, and you'll get, you know, that inlay result. The stone can also be used, and Tom's done a bunch of these in a crack. You know, if you have a bowl that cracks, what are you going to do? Okay, you can put CA glue in, you can put sawdust in, but anything you do, it's not going to make the crack go away, right? It's just, sometimes it just makes it more obvious that you repaired the crack. But if you put in some kind of stone, or you put in the nickel, silver, or copper, then it's, you know, then you've highlighted it, you've enhanced it. So that way, it's just a way to salvage something that, you know, it's like, okay, man, this was a nice bowl until it cracked. So by adding, you know, some stone or some other inlay into it, you can still have a nice bowl, sometimes a better bowl than if it wasn't there. Okay.
Well, Tom, you might mention to him the amount of work it is getting ready for that. You just, you know, I don't want to undersell that point.
Yeah, you know, I mean, crushing the stone takes some time. There's no question about that. And depending on how hard the stone is, it's, you know, it's going to take more time. And this is just a guess because I don't time it, but to crush this amount of red coral to put in here, it's probably 20 minutes. You know, it's probably 20 minutes. And I pour it through 3 different levels of sieves to get it, you know, the dust and the small and the medium. And then the bigger stuff I dump back in, crush some more, dump it in again, crush some more. And usually I sort it out kind of like I did here with the, you know, 3 plates where I sort it out, and then I put it in the containers. And I'll end up with 3 little containers of some sort. Pill bottles work really well for this. Red coral. So I've got red coral medium, red coral small, red coral dust. And then I go from there. Okay, so now we need to grind this stuff smooth. And are most of you power sanding? And you're using these Rolock kind of sanding discs, usually the softer ones? Well, this is a zircon disc, and it's harder than the stone, so it'll grind it down. And I don't know for a fact, but I'm just guessing, if sawdust is bad for your health, if you breathe it in, stone dust can't be any better. So I would normally wear a mask. And using a drill, just grind it off. And it will, because of the CA glue, it will clog up the disc pretty good. And you can feel it. You can probably hear it. You can hear the vibration, and I can feel it as it starts to get smoother there. It just got smoother. You're closer to being done. And it's still a little bit proud of the wood, so I'm going to sand it till I get down to wood. The other thing that happens if you try and use a carbide tool to cut this, there's a greater tendency that you're going to chip pieces of the rock out instead of just cutting it down. So I don't usually do it. You can do it. I have done it, but just not with it, not as successfully as doing it this way. And I'm running at about 450 RPMs, and I got the drill going full blast. And as you can see, it's getting clogged up. And you can clean it up a bit, but that CA doesn't come out as well as wood sap does, or wet wood. Okay. All right, so that's fairly smooth. So now I'm going to go to a 60 grit. And once you get past 36, the grits go by pretty fast. Come on. And I usually do with these discs, I go to about 120. So here's 80. Well, And after you get to that point, you can just go ahead and go back with sandpaper now to do your final sanding. Now, we're not done with the stone yet, most likely, because you almost always have some little voids in there. And if we look at this, not bad. I'm not seeing any. If you have any little voids left, you can go back with the dust. If they're real small, you can just fill them with CA glue. Okay, and we'll just sand it up a little farther.
Hey, Tom, I know you've done a couple of these, or more than a couple. How often do you have to go back and fill them with dust? Is that 1 in 3, 1 in 5?
Almost always I have to go back and do a little bit of fill at this point. I just got real lucky on this one, I guess, because it's looking pretty good. So now we're just going to grind this down or polish this up a little bit, and you're going to kind of go to whatever you want to sand the outside to. If you want to sand the outside to 320 or 400 or whatever you want to do, that's where you're going to go on this. Okay. And right now I'm at 220, and if you look at it, it looks pretty good. It looks better if you've got an air compressor to blow some of the dust out, but it's let's see if we can brush it out a little bit. You can get deceived with sanding dust in the holes and not stone. But that looks pretty good. Okay, so now we're going to turn away the wood on the outside. So I'm just going to sneak up on that stone. I really don't want to try and cut the stone with this tool. It's not too good for the edge. Not too good for the stone either. But I'll get pretty close. Waste away some of this. And you get to the point here where you can actually see the stone through the wood. That's when it's about time to stop turning. Okay, so you can see that even though I cut that groove on the lathe, on the chuck, without taking it off the chuck, it's still not even all the way around. So that's why it's really important you leave it on the chuck to minimize that impact of that. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the 36 and turn off the rest of the wood on the outside. And we're just going to get it down to the point where we got nothing but stone and get rid of that wood out there. No, not there yet. And by doing the stone as a rough turn bowl, you still have the ability to do anything you want with the shape of the bowl. You can do a lip on the top and undercut it. You can do anything you want, basically the outside shape of the bowl. And when you screw it up like I did and you end up taking away so much wood on the outside, you really have lots of room to play. Okay, I think I need a new disc. CA glue does like to clog them up pretty good. So you can count on using a couple to do a project like this. And they're also available on Amazon and eBay in the zircon is what it is. Okay, so we still got a little bit of wood there. And I don't know if you could see it. I should have probably pointed it out, but they're definitely on the side. There are voids. The stone does not settle in well on the outside, so you definitely have to go back and fill in the gaps. Okay, you can see here, there's some pretty significant gaps in the stone that need to get treated. And there's still a little bit of wood here. Can anybody else smell the CA? No? Okay, good. All right. So the wood's all gone on the outside. We're down to stone. Clear this off a little bit. Grab my newspaper, but not the obituaries. We'll hide that away. And stone up here. Okay, at this point, we're going to use the small stone and the dust only to fill in those little gaps. That's probably going to be mostly the dust. The dust. Okay, so CA and Accelerator. Okay, so once again, we're just going to put a little bit of stone in, and here we're just doing kind of one spot at a time. And we'll get the stone in. I think my tube got clogged up. Yep. If you've never used these little tubes, they're really good if you're trying to get it in a specific spot. Okay. And I'm just looking for the larger of these gaps right now, and I'm going to put in the small stone.
Hey, Tom, those plastic tubes give you a lot more control than just leaving
Oh,
the
yeah.
open tip.
Much more control. And if you use the Starbond glue, it usually comes with some of the tubes. But again, you can order them. Amazon carries them. I can't remember the exact price, but it's not very much. It's like $10 for 100 of them or something like that. I've never had to resort to that yet. I've always bought enough glue that I've got them. So. Okay, so now looking at the dust and any gaps that remain. Ah, come on, you're not going to clog up already. There you go. And this is kind of the last step with the stone, I hope, should be. And after this, if there's any little gaps, I would just fill them in with medium CA.
So, Tom, do you have any issues with the CA staining the wood? Do you ever spray it first?
Yes, that's why I put the sanding sealer on it to begin with. Now, unfortunately on this, I then turned away a bunch. So I don't know, we'll see. It may stain it on this one. If you're just doing it on the top and not exposing the side, I probably should have put more sanding sealer on here before I started using the CA again. But, you know, you didn't want to sit for a 4-hour demo, did you? Ah. Okay. Cooperate. We're getting there. So any questions about the stone, the crushing, what you can do, what you can't do? No? How many people think they'd be interested in doing this? Giving it a try? Linda, you've done some, haven't you? A little bit. The other thing that I've done with this, just as another kind of option of things you can do, is I did a winged bowl where the inlay was in the wing, and I turned away the wood on both the top and the bottom. So when you looked at the wing coming out the side, you could actually see through it. It was kind of semi-clear, and the stone was exposed on both the top and the bottom. So there are a lot of options. You can mix different kinds of stone together, like the one over there. That's okay. Stop sticking there. That's got the different colors of stone, and the epoxy inlay. Is another different option. I like the epoxy for some reasons because you can really see the depth. You can see the stones. In this, they're smooth, so you don't see the depth variation. You can't do this kind of a bowl with the epoxy. You have to have it exposed only on the top because you have no way of epoxying this edge once you turn away the wood. At least no way that I know of. I'm sorry, what was that? Yeah, except you're going to get the voids in the stones. Then how do you go back and fill in the voids? If the epoxy doesn't soak all the way in. Now I've done it. I've tried it the same way I did this process, where I left the wood there. So you're saying instead of leaving wood there, put painter's tape around and then pour it in. If you could figure out a way to leave that, put that, trying to how to explain this, the stone is going to be right up against the tape. Okay, so there's not necessarily going to be epoxy between the stone and the air. You know, when you take the tape off, you're not going to have the full covering of epoxy like you do there. And if the stones don't go together perfectly like they didn't here, and you're going to go back and try and fill in the gap with more stone, I don't know how you would do the epoxy at that point. Yes.
If it's a slow enough cure epoxy, you could probably mix up a slurry and pour it in that way, and that would avoid most of your void issue.
Yeah, you could also conceivably paint it on. You could conceivably brush it on and then polish it out. But I still see a problem with not, you know, on that bowl, there was a gap above the stone and the epoxy covered the gap. Okay, on this, and that's what showed the depth of the stone. If you put the stone in and poured the epoxy over it, I'm not sure what the outcome is going to be. I mean, it's worth a try. I think it'd be a challenge. I mean, I like the look of the epoxy too. I like this too. The epoxy is that the shine and, you know, the clear finish, and you can see it. I just don't know how you would accomplish the sides if you did it like this. You know, if it's only exposed on the top, works great. Okay, so now we go back to sanding. Let's see what we get here. And I'm back to 80 grit. And we're going to Okay, there are some voids still. Those size voids, I don't know how well they show up on the camera. Like right here. And then I don't think the camera's quite, yeah, okay. I just fill those with medium CA. And now I'm not using that little adapter because I want to get it in there a little thicker. Fill those holes. Getting there. And the color doesn't really come through until you get it sanded to a finer grit, you know. With the lower grit sandpaper, you get too much dust and it doesn't show the red color. If you look at the difference in the red color on that bowl and this, it's pretty significant, but it's from the same stone exactly. I mean, the same batch of stone. And just as an example, like I said, there's probably about $1 worth of coral in this. Most of the stones that I buy are anywhere from $10 to $20 a pound. And the thing to look out for is when you're looking for the stone, you want to search rough stone. You could, if you go on Amazon or eBay, search rough gemstones or raw gemstones or ground gemstones, something like that, and you'll get a lot of different options. And it just depends on who's selling it, on how they listed it. But the big thing you want to make sure is the hardness, that it's something that you can deal with if you're going to crush it the same way that I do, and also that it is natural stone, not something that's dyed. Okay, and that'll keep you out of trouble. Sanding discs or zircon, that's important. They do clog up pretty quickly, so you'll go through some of them, but they're not crazy priced. I think I paid $25 for 75 discs, assorted discs. And, you know, they went from 36 to, I think, 120 or maybe 36 to 80. But good stones that I would recommend to start the process are going to be calcite, fluorite, coral, rock salt. I've seen that done before, and that worked pretty well. Seashells. This is not my program. I did not invent this. I'm not very creative. I steal all my ideas from somebody else. There's a guy up in Canada, Sprague Wood Turning is where I saw this the first time. He did it typically with soapstone, which is very, very soft stone. It's probably not much harder than talc. I mean, it's a really soft stone. You can crush it. It's either light blue or white. There's not a lot of options. So I saw him doing this on a few YouTube videos, and I thought, well, I like the idea. I just don't like the stone. So then I started doing some research, and I came up with you know, some other stones that we can do this with that are of reasonable hardness that we can actually crush. He just took the stone and put it on a piece of metal and hit it with a hammer was how he was crushing it. You know, and it was much easier to do than most of what I do. But the slate is about as easy as what he was doing. If you want to do something to try this concept, Slate's a good place to start. It's inexpensive and it's soft. It's easy to work with. You know, might be a good first try, or even rock salt. You know, rock salt's pretty soft. I don't know what the hardness is on it, but it's not very hard. It's pretty soft.
So Tom, when you use an epoxy,
Uh-huh.
are you using any kind of special epoxy?
No.
or
No.
About 5
No.
minutes? Or-
I don't usually use 5 minute, but you could. I don't see why not. I think that would work fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
most of it dries clear though.
Yes, as long as it dries clear. It does have to be clear epoxy.
You got a brand?
I don't always use the same brand even.
Yeah.
I don't do a lot of epoxy work. Linda's probably the person to talk to about what epoxy to use. I don't do that much. And if you, all I know is it needs to be clear, and I don't want the real slow drying stuff, you know.
So when you do that, do you put the stone in first and then smoosh the epoxy
Yes.
around it?
The only difference with using the epoxy compared to this, okay, there's a couple differences. One is you need to do something to make sure that the wood doesn't show through the bottom. On this, because you layer it in, you cover the wood. If you just throw the stone in there, you can look through the gaps in the stone and you can see wood. So there's two solutions. One is you can dye the wood first with red if you're doing coral. The other thing is you can put a layer of the dust in first, and that's what I would recommend. So instead of putting in the larger stones first, you put in just a thin layer of the dust in the bottom, so that when you look at it, you're not looking down through and seeing the wood through the stone. And then you put the stone in, and you want to make sure that the groove is deeper and that the stone is below the surface of the wood. So you've got some room for that epoxy to sit on top of it. So, you need not much, a 1/16 of an inch, maybe. I don't know. I've never really measured it, but if you look at that one, you can see there's just a fairly thin layer of epoxy over it. So then what I do is I put the dust in, put the stone in, put enough CA in just to hold things in place. And then you need to let it sit though. Okay, you want to make sure that the CA is totally cured before you pour the epoxy in over top of it. And then you pour the epoxy in. Yes.
The question was asked about the brand. I would not suggest Alumilite Clear Slow, because that has to be put in a pressure pot.
Right.
Unless your piece would fit in a pressure pot, I would not suggest the Alumilite Clear Slow, which a lot of us use for wood turning. But Alumilite does make a clear, amazing clear cast that's available in all the hardware
Actually,
stores.
I have used that.
That is actually for thin layers. And that would be good because it will dry hard maybe in 24 to 48 hours. But you do have to have your piece of wood level because it's going to use gravity
Right.
to
Yes.
level itself off.
Yes, and if you've got a heat source to get some of the air bubbles off is a good idea too, because most of the air bubbles on the Alumilite, whatever she said. I've used that product. That works well. That's probably what I used on that one actually. But you do get some air bubbles in there. Most of them rise to the surface, but if a little bit of heat, you can burst those bubbles and it'll be a lot better.
To burst the bubbles, you can also use a spray alcohol. Just a thin layer of that. That'll help burst the bubbles on top.
So just denatured alcohol in a spray bottle?
Or even 99%
Oh,
regular
okay.
alcohol. Just put in a little spray bottle and that'll help burst any bubbles that are on top. It won't go deep. Your bubbles have to rise to the surface.
But even with the quick cure epoxies, you've got some time to work with. You don't want the slow cure for sure, unless you want to wait, a week to finish the project. And at that point, then on the epoxy, because you're going to be sanding the rest of the bowl, you're going to sand the epoxy too. So you're going to ultimately have to do a wet sanding on that with micro mesh to have a really nice finish on it. Okay, so we're almost there. Now we're just taking down that last bits of CA glue that I filled in the gaps with. This lathe seems like it's got a break. When you turn it off, it just stops. Okay, you also get a real sharp edge on here. As you sand this down, that's a very sharp edge on there right now. So you're going to want to round that over. And I would usually just use some, a little bit of sandpaper and if I were to touch that while it was spinning on the lathe, I definitely would have known I touched something that I shouldn't have. Okay, so that's basically the process. Now you're just turning a bowl. Okay, so you can do whatever design you want to do to turn it. The more you sand this off, when you go to the higher grits, the better it's going to look. And is that 180? And it will polish up fairly quickly. Now, normally I would finish turning the bowl before I sand this any farther than I had it. But and I would also recommend blowing it off with an air compressor if you have one handy between different grits. You'll get a lot of that dust out of there and you'll be able to see where you're at better. And this is really a quick sanding. I don't usually resort to the micro mesh on the stone that's in with the CA. Normally, I'll sand a 320, maybe 400. And this is with a quick sanding to 400 right now. And now see if I can get this off of here. Okay, this was the quick and not too perfect version of this. We can pass that around. That's by sanding it longer and putting finish over top of it, the color comes out a lot better. You know, as with with wood, you know, when you put some finish on it, the grain pops. Well, on this, when you if you use something to clean it first, like use some mineral spirits or something to wipe it down, you'll get some of the dust off of there and it'll look redder than it does in that example. Questions? That is hornbeam, that wood. I have no idea. I really don't know. I don't know. We're fortunate in Show Me Turners to have a member that has a connection to Missouri Botanical Gardens, and sometimes he comes up with some things from their tree trimmings, or they have to cut down a tree, and we get some weird wood. I never heard of hornbeam before he brought that stuff into the meeting one time. But it's a pretty interesting wood. It's the grain is nice when it's finished, and it's pretty interesting. Okay, so coral's a good choice. I like using the coral. It's easy to work with, and it works well. Linda, what did you do with the one you did? What kind of stone did you put in yours? I don't remember. You don't either. Oh, okay. Yeah, you can
It
buy.
was crystallite and I bought it.
Yeah, you
at,
can. There are a bunch of
yeah.
stones that are commercially available to use for inlays, and they're fine if you're doing something small. I mean, they're already crushed and you can put them in there. But if you're doing something on that scale, it would get pretty pricey pretty quickly, because it's, instead of being, $10 to $20 a pound, it's $20 an ounce, kind of pricing. Yeah.
I did order some that was already crushed for doing it. And I got a little 2-gram bottle, and I think I probably paid about $8 to $10 for it. It was microscopic.
Yeah, it's a tiny little
Pretty
bit.
expensive.
Yeah, I don't know the gram to ounce conversion, but it's not much. It's not much stone. Okay. Turn it just like you would any other bowl. At this point, you just turn the inside of the bowl out, turn the outside, turn away the inside, however you want to design the bowl. Okay, and then you're going to finish the stone the same way you did finish the wood. You sand it to 320 if that's where you're going to go, and then put your polyurethane, lacquer, shellac, whatever you want to put on it. Okay, so you finish it this. Correct. And if you look at the examples here, okay, we got two different kind of deals here, where this one's undercut, okay, and then it's got a little bit of a detail on the outside, and then this one is just turned down to the same thickness as the stone. Okay, now you got to be a little careful with this, doing it this way, because if you turn it down a little too far, it doesn't work so good. If the bowl gets thinner than the stone, you got a problem. Okay. Also, I'm not sure about the durability of doing this, because CA glue is very brittle. If this were to be dropped, I've got a feeling that the stone is no longer connected to the wood. I'm not going to try it to find out, but it's my suspicion, because there's not a lot of surface that it's glued to on here. If you're doing it, one like this, what I did on this one actually was the groove around the outside of the bowl. Well, maybe. Okay, so you got the groove in here. Actually had a deeper spot in the middle. Well, if we had a marker that worked, I might be able to do something here. Okay, so let's try doing it bigger. Yes, that's what the groove looked like. So you have more contact surface with the glue. And this part of the groove was big enough that the larger of the stones that I use actually fit down inside it. So now we have more contact area. If it were only glued on that little surface area, I think it'd be kind of a recipe for failure. And then again, if you look at this one with the epoxy over the top, the stone is all below the surface, so that it's got a coating of epoxy over the whole thing. Any questions? How many people are going to try it? All right, good.
All right, let's give Tom a big hand. Appreciate it.